and salutations, listener. It is I, Eric J. Chucci, here as always with my violently bald counterpart, the boy.
Hey.
And this is the Two Nerds Podcast. Boy, I feel like I am 10,000 years away from the mic. Can you scoot that up?
You're no further away than usual, my friend.
That's better. Look at those peaks now. This is what you came here for, quality entertainment. Before we get started and talk about how far away I am from the mic anymore, if we could please ask you to hit the like button, and if you'd like to, comment and subscribe. But mostly, that little thumbs up, it is in the lower right. You might have to scroll down a skosh to see it. Please hit that. I would appreciate it. Also, if you check our description for the video, there's a link there to Super Blizzard's Bandcamp page. That Shining Was Auto track of his, Let's Get Hardcore, that's our opening theme music and our closing theme music. He gave that to us for free because we said, don't you worry, Super Blizzard, we will get you some buys on your tracks so you can continue to make sweet, sweet video games.
Promises of buys do not reflect the actual policy of Two Nerds Incorporated.
We're not an incorporation. We're a subsidiary of Sportco Studios. We're a product.
True.
Anyway, hello, this is a podcast.
Hello. This week, we are doing another, I think we've already done one or two, in the series of suggestions brought to you by you, listener. So, on the great big wheel, we constructed a very elaborate spinning wheel.
It took me days to build.
I
had to hew the wood from trees myself.
He punched them.
The only carpentry I know is from Minecraft. Then I set it all in 6-shaped blocks, but it doesn't happen.
But eventually we managed to discern the wheel wanted us to do this subject this week. It was the 10 books that have most influenced our lives. Not the 10 books that we like the best necessarily, just the ones that influenced us the most.
Which is why my list is weird.
And which is why my list has at least one series of books on here that's not something I'm very fond of anymore. But we'll get to that. How did you want to start this? You want to start this just by shouting out the first one on your list or mine? I figure we can bounce back and forth with questions.
Yeah, let's just start with your book. The short version, listener, before we get too far. We stole this from a Facebook meme. A Facebook.
Incorrect, sir. It was suggested by the listener, and we both found out we had previously answered this exact same question on Facebook, thanks to a Facebook meme.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. That's the slightly longer version of what I was saying.
More accurate.
And more accurate, yes. So we're kind of, I don't want to say reading off of cue cards here, but this list is well made up in advance. Even some of the supporting reasons are made up in advance. But, you, the listener, wanted to know. We, the talkers, had to talk about something. So here we are! I really thought WrestleMania was this week.
But it should be fun.
It's good stuff.
I imagine we're both going to try our damnedest to just not do a dramatic reading for you.
But yeah, there's no order to this. It's not best to worst or even chronological. It's just...
Dear Christ, no. I don't have time to put these in order.
As they came to our head.
Yep.
Our collective, bulbous, throbbing head that needs a second beard.
I shaved my head for charity, and I shaved my beard along with it, and it's violently disturbing him.
He's got some stubble going, so I can stand to see him out of my periph. I was worried about the podcast, Ultimo. But, next week is going to be a lot easier.
Alright, so.
Yeah, you start.
The first one is, if you know much about me, listeners, probably not a surprise. It's the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. This is a book series that taught me a lot about fandom.
And what it is to be a wizard.
No. I knew much about what it is to be a wizard beforehand.
What it is to be a boy wizard in England.
I probably learned a lot from that, yeah.
And the conversion rate between nuts and galleons.
No, I still don't know that shit. It taught me a lot about fandom, because it was the first thing that led me to read fan fiction and get into, and looking at fan art. I can't draw to save my fucking life, so I also never wrote fan fiction, so don't go looking. But
not under Squeak Toy, anyway.
Anyway, it also taught me a lot about, like, finding friends. Not like how to do it, but how important it could be for one's development. I think is the easiest way to explain it. Do you have any, like,
I like Harry Potter. Would you like say any of the one books are more influential than the others?
You know what?
Not favorite, because I know the answer to that question, and if you'd like to tell Ultimate Dragon, I'm sure he'd appreciate it.
Order of the Phoenix.
But what was there one that like made you go, yeah, a little more than the others and like spurred you to thinking? Or whatever. You want to,
Yeah. It was, probably Prisoner of Azkaban. It's the most low key of the Harry Potter novels.
That's fair.
Probably the least stressful. Because up until a certain point, these books, like, I got them when I was the exact age appropriate. Like,
oh yeah, up until they stopped coming out every year.
Yeah. So I was right in line. I started reading it when I was 11, 2 when I was 12, so on and so forth up until a certain point. Got to 3 when I was 13, and it was, one, a very cool book, and yeah, it was probably the one that got me, that really drove home how important a close group of friends can be.
That's cool.
You'll find that's actually a common theme.
Well, I think it's a good theme in general, and someday, later this year, I'll be doing a video about it.
Would you like to borrow Blizzard's Soon TM for this?
No, I've actually got the assets going. I did some work on them last night.
Nice. What about you, sir? What was the first thing on your list?
I told y'all it was going to be a weird list. I love reading. I do. I can't. Well, rather I can, but it's very hard for me because of strange complexes I don't have time to go into. But it's difficult for me to sit down and just read, be it a book or fan fiction or whatever. I kind of have to be isolated from the world. But in my youth, I enjoyed lots of books. But this is about what books were influential and what, shaped who I am today. So we begin with the official Nintendo Player's Guide published by Nintendo Power. This book was about an inch thick and had, I'm going to say 20 games, it might have been more, worth of every fucking map in those games. Super Mario Brothers, Castlevania, Metroid, and it would go into detail about the enemies and tell you, how to avoid them. It was a strategy guide. But it was, this was like the early 90s. My family didn't have the money for all these games. So I kind of vicariously got to play them through there and, learned about all of this fluff and these interesting worlds that I knew someday I would see. And I was a little kid. I don't know. And there was a bunch of previews in the back of the book for games that were coming out on the NES. They were much shorter, just like little blurbs, like a genre and a couple of screenshots. But there was so much interesting stuff there. And, I was basically a gamer as soon as I was old enough to hold a controller. But this is what really cemented that identity before I understood what either of those words meant. Fun story. This rather sleek player's guide, the cover fell off of it at some point. So much did I read it. But I was reading it in the bathtub once, because that's how I rolled, and still would. And I dropped it. And my mom dried it off for me, but the book ballooned up to 3 times its size, because it was magazine pages. It still read just fine, though, so I kept reading it. I had it until I was about 12, and I got it when I was, I couldn't have been more than 5, 6. I wasn't in school yet, so that book was my baby.
Yeah, it looks like your Linus blanket.
Yeah, kinda. It kept me entertained,
I want to ask questions about that, but I have no experience with it.
Yeah, I know sometimes it's kind of difficult to, have a back and forth about such isolated things. And I know there's a lot of stuff in your list that I'm not even fucking familiar with in the least.
That's okay. I'm more comfortable pontificating like an asshole than you are.
Well, I shared a story, so why don't we just move along? What's your next thing?
The next thing I have on my list is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I've cheated a bunch and put, like, anthologies and series on here, because fuck you, I can.
As I was given it, it was books/series.
Okay, good. But yeah, The Lord of the Rings. Okay, so I know a lot of kids got The Hobbit first because it's a lower reading level book. It's more child friendly, and a lot of adults who want get their kids excited for reading give them The Hobbit because let's face it, The Hobbit is a faster paced story, and it's a great way to get them interested in this world that the parents probably grew up loving as well. I did not.
While smoking that Hobbit weed.
Hey, you know what? It was the 70s, okay? I was not that guy. I found The Lord of the Rings, and I found it before I even knew The Hobbit was a fucking thing. Like, I finished the entire Lord of the Rings series a couple years before I even knew The Hobbit was a thing. Because I didn't really have the internet, and nobody told me. It's what made me a fantasy nerd. The books are dry. Anyone who's read them will probably tell you that they're really dry. Somewhat over-descriptive. But the world that Tolkien created was so deep, so rich, and well-made that it actually is probably part of what sparked, not necessarily the love of settings I have, because I do have a deep love of, like, settings, but the enjoyment I find in reading the entire history of a fictional world. Because I'm a history buff, so it just pushes all sorts of buttons.
Well, yeah, and the Lord of the Rings books really gave you a lot of information that the Hobbit didn't. For the sake of making this a bit of a dialogue, that's actually what one of the books on my list is The Hobbit, which I prefer to Lord of the Rings because all of that dry read and info dump is replaced by whimsy and fancy. The Hobbit was far from the first foray into fantasy I encountered. I don't have an F word there. Found, it's kind of lazy.
Yeah, a little.
But it sort of was like, all right, you're in. This is the Kool-Aid. You have drank into the Kool-Aid.
Congratulations. There's no going back now.
Because I had already, by that point in my life, I'd been playing Final Fantasy for years, and this was back when Final Fantasy was fantasy. And Dungeons and Dragons, and a board game, whose name I always forget, but it was like D&D minis, but it was a board game. You'll find it if you search the internet. I played that shit a lot, and I loved it.
I just realized I encountered Lord of the Rings well before I played D&D or anything of the sort. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't
play D&D. I had D&D.
Like
I'll go into that more later.
Cool.
But my stepdad actually got me a box set of The Hobbit and then the Lord of the Rings trilogy for Christmas one year. And he was like, "You'll like this because it's cool." Basically exactly what you said. Your weird old 70s, parental figure is like, "Dude, hobbits." And I was like, "Yeah, hobbits."
Yes, this is really good.
I fell in love with it. I searched out the Rankin Bass videos at my local video store. It was just such a rich world, and all of the whimsy that was in The Hobbit, that the Lord of the Rings series didn't have, I think is what made it more solid in my head than the other books, even though I, with the exception of Return of the King, basically read them one after another. Lord of the Rings was so dry and so dire, and obviously it's going to be dire. It's a bit of a darker story, a lot darker story, but there's also a lot of character jumping around, and that's a risk when you don't like some of the characters, and The Hobbit was a more concise, fun read. There's something I told you earlier today, I mentioned in passing, that the way I write is very movie-oriented, very Michael Bay. I want to see people get in, get what they came for, and get out. This is not about having you sit around diddling, going, "Ooh, look at the architecture in this ballroom." No, fucking dude here, demons bad, shoot demons, book over, have a nice day, thank you for your ticket purchase, you can read it again anytime you want. And The Hobbit was not that, but way the fuck more than Lord of the Rings was.
Whereas, largely when I read, I prefer the more introspective, not so far as to be navel-gazing, but I prefer the stories that allow themselves to unspool a little bit more freely.
Well, I mean, a little around the edges is fine. There's a reason I prefer the medium of books as my instrument over movies. I don't run around with a Super 8 camera by any stretch.
Besides the fact that they're cheaper and easier to do stuff in.
Well, gosh, I mean, yeah. But, there's so much more you can tell in a book, so many more ways to tell it, to skew perspectives and things. I love movies, but I like long movies. I like long movies that get into, the whats and the whys,
so
that analyze characters.
You feel like the happy medium is somewhere between, like, Transformers and Lord of the Rings. Somewhere in between there lies wisdom.
Yeah. Somewhere, I don't have a movie off the top of my head that fits that bill. Everything I've been watching that's been good lately has been about an hour and a half, and that's bog standard.
Yep, 90 minutes. Get in, get out, have your movie.
Yeah.
But
I think Kubrick, I guess, is kind of what you're gaming for.
In terms of books?
Yeah. Stories ripped off of other people, told very differently.
Ooh! Shots fired.
No, Kubrick was a genius, just,
He hated some stuff. He did. Alright. That was cool.
Thank you. I tried.
The back and forth there. I like that The Hobbit was on yours.
Yeah.
I guess that's back to me then.
Yep, that's back to you.
The next one I have is The Complete Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
None of that half-assed Sherlock Holmes?
No, that's the name of the fucking book.
Oh, okay.
I didn't name it. Fuck you.
The half-assed Sherlock Holmes by Stephen Moffat.
Ho! Ho! Anyway.
Up top.
Nope,
Yeah.
that did not happen. He high-fived himself.
Like I would lie.
You lie all the time.
I'm lying right now.
Oh, God. Oh, God. So, I found that a lot of these stories are going to start very similarly for me because I did not have a mentor or someone who introduced me to books.
I excavated a book from the ruins.
I didn't have a lot of teachers who really pushed me to read interesting fiction. They just sort of gave me the same stuff everyone gives you, like Mice and Men, and so on and so forth. But I had access to a library from a very young age, a school library, and because I lived in the fucking sticks, a bookmobile. And I utilized that access.
Whatever, the bookmobile is amazing.
There was just not a local library.
Oh.
Like, it didn't exist until I was like 15, 16.
Still, bookmobile. A+.
Yeah, I'm not hating on the bookmobile. I love the bookmobile. But I utilized that access. So I found the complete Sherlock Holmes in like my elementary school library or something. It was like, I don't know why it was there. But I found it. And I read it. And it changed the way I think about stuff. I admire Sherlock Holmes as a character, despite being a cocaine addict. Or perhaps because of. I love the way that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the books. I love the way he portrayed this character and the viewpoint the character had of the world. It helped me think about things logically as a kid. It helped inform how I viewed the world. It helped make me into the person I am today, and that's kind of what this list is about. So I figured it probably deserved a slot. It helped me think through things. At this point, it's been so long, I can't actually remember if this. I believe this was actually something Sherlock Holmes said. Once you remove the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth.
Yeah. That's largely attributed to him.
Yeah. I can't remember if it's an actual quote or not.
Good enough to say largely attributed to.
Yeah. That is a really good way of looking at the world. It's open-minded, but not gullible. And it helped, and that series helped instill that in me. It also gave me a love of mysteries that I still have, like a well-crafted mystery, a fair one, which, to be fair, not all of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's stories were fair. Lots of them were incredibly unfair. But a really well-crafted, fair mystery is something that I enjoy deeply.
I mean, I feel like the obvious question to ask here... No, let's go with the other obvious question. The first one was going to be, well, what modern interpretation of Sherlock is your favorite? We've discussed this at length. So, instead, what would you say is your favorite Sherlock story from said collected works?
Favorite Sherlock story?
Not necessarily the most inspirational one or whatever. Just your favorite.
The one that usually pops to mind when I'm thinking about it. Is, and this is going to sound really trite, but it is actually true, I really love The Hound of the Baskervilles.
I think, it's one of those things where a lot of people say it because it's fucking fact.
It's really fucking good. I also love A Scandal in Bohemia, but that's just a very short story.
Right on. We're going to go back to me now, because I'm pretty.
Also, it's your turn.
That is immaterial.
Secondary?
Yes, it's tertiary, really. This one is very broad, but honestly, out of all of these books that are actual books, like you would expect, I think it's probably the most important. And that is the Choose Your Own Adventure series of books. I got a lot of flack pretty much all my life for enjoying these books, because they're not super highbrow.
No, they are not.
And, you don't read them like you read most books, and that it's different, so it must be stupid mentality kicks in a lot. And I never pretended that they were, oh yes, I am quite the educated scholar. I have read many a Choose Your Own Adventure novel. But they were fun. They were popcorn books. And more than that, I got to pick what happened. I mean, it's sort of like, chicken and egg scenario, but I think this really helped establish how much I love choice in the media I consume. I like to be able to pick my weapons in a video game. I love RPGs, both console and pen and paper, because the world is my fucking oyster. I spent hours when I was a kid in Final Fantasy IV, which was 2 back then, just renaming my characters dumb shit, because I could. If I get into a game today, and I can't at least change one thing about my character, it is definitely going to impact my enjoyment of the game. Which, fortunately, we've grown up into a society where that's not really a thing, but it happens to be a matter of fact. Shovel Knight, for all as amazing as it was, spoilers for those of you who haven't watched my videos yet, I was like, it's too bad there's not really anything you can do like Mega Man, where you can pick your weapons or whatever after you've defeated a boss. Aha! But then I hit the town where you can change your armor and get weapon upgrades, and I was like, fucking sweet! This game's amazing!
I find it interesting that having the ability to impact your experience in any way is so very vastly important to you.
I don't mind being told a story, but let me put it to you this way, okay? If you would give me the choice between watching about a half-an-hour special on energy conservation, and it's fun, but that's all I'm doing, or going on Ellen's Energy Adventure at Disney World, I would pick Ellen's Energy Adventure, even though I've already seen it 3 times. Because you get to go on a ride, and there's dinosaurs, and there's shit all around you. The little theater experience is so interesting, and it's so interactive. I mean, I don't really get to make any choices, but it's not necessarily focused on narcissism, it's about involvement. I have such a hard time, even with a healthy suspension of disbelief, staying connected with shit. to where that if I do forge that bond, it's got to be something very special to me. And anything you can do to help me forge that bond, I think this is answering some questions we've had as friends for years now, like characters I can very strongly relate to, letting me choose even the smallest parts of what's going on here. It helps. It helps me focus on the media I'm enjoying instead of what I need to be doing when I get home, what I need to be doing in 20 minutes, when I need to go to bed so I can get up for work the next morning, etc., etc.
That's actually very interesting. And I'd love to discuss it more at length, but...
that's not what this podcast is about.
And that would take hours.
I would like to mention before we take it back over to you, if I had to pick a favorite, it was The Mystery of the Secret Room by Ellen Kushner. That was just a lot of fun. It was like a boy found a secret room under his grandma's stairs, and there were like 3 treasure chests in it, and depending on which one you opened, like, took you into a different story path. One was with a griffin, and, like, there's all kinds of shit that could happen, you know, with the griffin. One of the things being, like, you could do, like, Falcor revenge on some bullies. And then one of the chests had, a boy from the Middle Ages named Ingrid, I want to say. And you could go on adventures with him, and I think there was a way you could go back to his time period. And then the other one had a girl in it. I don't remember her name. She was from Brazil, and she had, like, multicolored hair. And, you could do something, but it ended up
Go finish your story.
Sure. One of the things you could do is, when she got there, she's like, "Oh, I time traveled! Awesome! Are the Beatles still around? Are they still together?" And you're like, "No, John Lennon died, like, so long ago." And she's like, "We need to go back in time and stop that." And through this book, you could literally go back and talk down the dude who shot John Lennon, or, like, delay him long enough so that it doesn't happen. I mean, there were so many possibilities in this one little fucking book. Just adventures awaiting. That was one of my favorites. Worst one was UFO 5440, because it was boring. Like, it wasted potential. It was like, look, an interesting galaxy full of shit. Don't touch any.
Side note, that's a weird pattern. I've noticed people from Brazil having multicolored hair is something that I've seen in a few things.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I wanted to point that out.
That's curious. Right, well, back over to you, my friend. What is...
His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. This is the one I mentioned earlier. I'm not actually that fond of this series these days. Looking back on it, it's an incredibly well-done personal story about 2 people finding each other and becoming close, at the very least friends, in the middle of an odd and very traumatizing series of events. It's also a few other very well-done personal stories about, you know, faith and the cost of belief and a couple other things. And those are well done. It's an interesting idea of worlds and an interesting idea of the price that adventure pays and the price of curiosity. It is also the most bitter, hateful, they're out to get me screed against Christianity I have ever read. Now, when I first found it, as an angry teenager, that was aces. These days, it's just so overwhelmingly bitter that I can't find enjoyment in the well-told story between those man standing on a soapbox and covered in his own waste matter with matted hair, screaming at a church level screeds.
I like that word, screed.
So do I. That's why I
This is that movie with the polar bear?
Yeah, this is that movie with Panzerbjorn. That's a really fucking cool character.
I've never seen the movie. I've never read the books.
I did not know how they were going to do the other movies in that series, because there comes a point in that series where if they had continued, if the first one hadn't bombed, dude, then a church would have gotten firebombed, okay? Or rather a movie theater would have gotten firebombed by a church.
Yeah. I know nothing about it. I can't really offer any dialogue. The bear seemed pretty cool.
The bear was pretty cool.
There we go. I'm vindicated.
Yeah. I believe that's back to you, sir.
Yeah, sure. I want to tell the next two sort of back to back. So let's go to My Teacher Glows in the Dark by Bruce Coville. Were you much of a Bruce Coville reader when you were younger?
Don't even know what the fuck that is.
He was actually kind of a prolific children's science fiction author.
Must have just missed him.
I like how you tend to judge me a lot for my lack of sci-fi initiation, and yet, there it is.
I read adult sci-fi.
Oh, the porn, I understand. Moving on. No, actually, the entire My Teacher's an Alien series is great. It's one big story, 4 books, I believe. Yeah. The first 2 were okay, and the last one is climactic, and I appreciate a good climax. But the third one, instead of dealing with problems with aliens on Earth, the main character went to space. And all of the interactions there, and just all of the weird, bizarre shit that you would expect from something like that, where you go to space in friendly fashion, it was... Like, you mentioned that The Lord of the Rings was your big foray into fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
This is what made me love sci-fi even more than Star Wars already had. Like, you can not like sci-fi but like Star Wars.
Yeah.
This is what I was like, no, this is amazing. I mean, this is probably a lot of what made me a xenophile. Not in the sexual sense, necessarily, but in the sense that I love things that are different or wrong or odd, just because they're different or wrong or odd. I gave a report on the series dressed as Poot, the slug monster from the book. My mom made me a little costume, and I had little eye stalks, and it was delightful. But I'm sure photographic evidence of it exists somewhere, and I was precious. But I really enjoyed the books. It just had some really interesting ideas, and I mean, like, I could just describe the book to you, but that wouldn't be any good. You know, read it. I mean, it's okay. You're fucking adults. It's 4 kids' books. It's going to take you, what, an afternoon? 4 days if you're a busy person.
One a day. Like a vitamin.
Yeah.
Like a sci-fi vitamin. Unfortunately, much like the last thing, I have no fucking idea what it is, so I can't really...
Yeah, you know what? Forgive me for the years of, rose-colored glasses, but maybe you should try to seek them out. We have a local library. It couldn't take you much time.
No, probably wouldn't.
You're always looking for more shit to read.
That I am.
This is...
If they aren't low enough reading level, did they begin to grate on my nerves?
Oh, no, I was in, I want to say 4th, 5th grade when I started reading them. That's not too bad. That's like a Goosebumps.
Yeah. I also never read Goosebumps.
Really?
Or Fear Street.
I don't know.
R.L. Stein did not touch my childhood at all.
Goosebumps was interesting. I don't know. It was fun.
That was an interesting little...
I liked it more as... Look, let's be perfectly fucking honest here. Fuck the Goosebumps TV series. It was like Are You Afraid of the Dark in book form.
Okay. Yeah, that's
they
not
were
bad.
They were shitty little morality stories with usually had a twist ending, and they weren't too scary, but they were like eerie and creepy, and other words said in a Boris Karloff imitation.
Nice.
Medical coverage. Dow Jones.
Stop. Okay. Moving on, I think, before you continue the Boris Karloff impression for the rest of the podcast runtime, which you may do anyway. The next one on my list is The Rainmaker by John Grisham. Again, in my teenage years, I went through a political thriller phase of reading.
Never had that.
I read a bunch of them, and a lot of them were John Grisham novels, along with some other
spent
stuff.
that time masturbating, so...
I spent that time that I should have been masturbating reading political thrillers, and The Rainmaker's probably one my favorite, and 2, probably the one that influenced me the most, as you might expect from being on this list once again. ultimately, I think that part of it that influenced me, that the merits of the spot on this list, is that a big lesson of the book is that you can't always win. But sometimes it's important as a small force, as a small person, to stand up against overwhelming odds to try, because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes it's important to try and get out what little victory you can have from such an unbalanced encounter.
Even a god can bleed.
Exactly. It is exactly that message, and I think that's the part that influenced my thinking the most. It's also just an incredibly well-made story. It has cool characters, it has interesting conflict, an interesting moral debate. Have you read, do you even know the plot of?
Nope.
Okay then.
I don't even, when I was younger, people tended to smugly hold over my head that they were reading John Grisham when I was reading whatever fantasy crap I scrounged from the library. So, I kind of developed a bad taste for the author, unfairly, I will state, because of those people.
Yeah, those people were dicks. He's not any better or worse than any other fiction author.
But, and it's really just not for me at this point. It's not my kind of...
Yeah, I don't expect you to read it now. That's not how you roll.
No.
But another good John Grisham novel that I feel like pointing out that also has an interesting moral conflict at its center is The Runaway Jury. They made a movie adaptation out of both these. I don't actually like the adaptation of The Rainmaker, if memory serves. I only saw it once, and it didn't really stick with me, quite unlike the book, so that tells you something. I like the movie adaptation of Runaway Jury about as much as I like the book, but for entirely different reasons. So I would suggest, if you are looking for things, look out both. Check out both.
But you don't have to take my word for it.
I'm not LeVar Burton. I'm not nearly that cool. Neither are you.
Dun-dun-dun! That was a segue. Let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Specifically speaking, the Dungeons & Dragons Fantasy Role-Playing Game Expert Rules Set 2, published by TSR. Am I getting you in the Wayback Machine yet? Are you here with me in said Wayback Machine, going through time to a land where TSR, that horrible fucking company, was a thing?
Yeah, they weren't the best.
No. You can read about that on the internet. It's the place where you're watching this video, with your eyes, and just staring longingly at the Two Nerds logo. Staring right back at you.
If you look long enough into the abyss looks back. Put in some eyes right here. Do it.
Okay, I'll totally remember to do that.
You
and
won't.
he never remembered.
Nope.
The summary of, the reason I gave you the full title there is because I did not have all the books. My mom found this at a garage sale. She was like, "You might like this." You guys have heard my mom. She doesn't sound like that. She sounds like slightly different me, and that's hard to imitate. So yeah, I loved it. It was stats about monsters and rules for adventuring in the overland and hex maps, and I was like, oh, stuff! I remember building my own monsters that I couldn't play against because I didn't have the rules for regular characters or rolling stats or anything like that. And I built my own campaign worlds, and I cobbled together rules for games based on stuff I knew from Final Fantasy and the stuff I could kind of infer from this book. And I played some games with my friends, and it was kind of fun. But mostly I just looked at all the cool monsters and read all about all the neat treasure and the suggested adventures. And this really got me to be where I am now as somebody who makes a role-playing game, makes role-playing games. This is what led me to appreciate world building, not having the first book to make characters, but instead the DM's guide, essentially. And, I mean, I don't know how much more, well, there's one thing, but I don't know how much more strong of an impact something could have in my life as this. I did end up using it to do some role-playing. I had a friend who sort of remembered the rules to D&D, so we role-played a little bit. It was a little fun. But he moved away. But yeah, we managed to track down a copy of some of the other rules Brandy did, and we have most of them. And sometimes I leaf through them and go, what weird artwork.
That was a little strange.
Yeah.
Any of the questions I was going to ask you answered in your
Cool.
little...
Well, I'm thorough.
Yeah. I am less so.
I can't always be thorough. Look, my teacher glows in the dark was just kind of like, I don't know, it was good, read it.
I'll just move right along because I got nothing.
No segue?
Nope.
Alright.
I'm not as good at those. So, this is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. Okay. Now, I know I promised you, listener, that I wouldn't do a dramatic reading. But there's a line here that I wrote in this little blurb I made on this Facebook post that is the best encapsulation of why this book is on this list. It taught me a lot about perspective, because it beat Watchmen to a very specific message. Nothing ever ends. Ender's Game was a good story. This is the sequel to that. Speaker for the Dead is a more important story, because it shows you that, as I just said, nothing ever ends. There's never a the end and then they lived happily ever after. Life continues on, no matter how good or bad something is. It will keep going until you are actually dead, and even then, life will continue on without you, provided you did not die in some sort of cataclysm that destroyed all life in the universe.
That's my plan.
How actively are you pursuing this plan?
Are we talking, do I have a doomsday virus?
Really, any active heading towards this plan I feel like we should know about, both myself and the listener?
I plead the fifth.
I see. Well, don't mind any of the sharp objects in the house. I'm sure that you'll be getting acquainted with them shortly. But before that, turns out Orson Scott Card's kind of a douchebag.
Kind of a douchebag in the same way that Chick-fil-A is kind of a religious establishment.
Kind of, yeah. Which is unfortunate, but I think this is why I strive, when I can, to separate art from artist, because I still think that this book is really good. And I think that it has a lot of positive messages in it.
That's cool. I don't game the end, so I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Is this the one where he went to, like, crazy reverse backwards Brazil and found all the aliens or whatever?
Well, I mean, kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
Crazy reverse backwards Brazil is not an accurate way to phrase it, but a way that gets your point across.
Listener, if you've seen any of my gameplay videos, you know that phrasing things the wrong way but getting my point across is kind of my fucking forte. I wish I could ask questions about this, but not enough to read it. I think Ender would bug the shit out of me.
Oh god, yeah, no, you'd hate it.
Because it's, okay, it's,
You'd probably like Peter Wiggin a lot more.
It's, a lot like, what's that fucking giant robot anime? Evangelion. Right? It's kind of like, the personal story is kind of like the personal story there.
Yeah, alright. I have not actually heard that comparison before, but I could see it.
So yeah, that would... I know it's different.
No. Let them be mad. Let them be mad and post it in the comments.
Yeah, because that way I will know how much of a tool bitch I am.
Please let him know. He needs to know. And I've told him and he's not listening.
Speaking of me being a tool bitch, next on my list is Vampire the Masquerade, Revised Edition, published by White Wolf Games. Yeah! So I didn't... Dungeons & Dragons was like... it gave me the tool set I needed to build a role-playing game. Vampire was the first role-playing game I played in earnest. And it wasn't good. And I don't know how much of that is the fault of the Vampire system, which I still find fault with today. But the New World of Darkness, their actual rolling system is much cleaner. Old World of Darkness was not. But the fluff and, all the way the book portrayed things really stuck with me over the years. The all-encompassing but very laser-focused breadth of things you could do really impressed me. But it was the game we played. Barely understanding the rules, flying by the seats of our pants, doing nothing but making references to animes and other shit that we enjoyed.
So you played Fishmalks, just a sea of them?
With me, yeah.
Awesome.
Please, I was in high school. Are you kidding me? Some Gangrel and a handful of Nosferatu. Yeah, I mean, this is what got me into actively role playing. Aside, instead of rather staying at home making up role playing worlds or playing role playing video games, which there's nothing wrong with. This is what got me into throwing dice with pals, because D&D was the next step from this sweet, sweet bygone 2nd edition, and the devil that I did not know was a devil in 3rd. They came very shortly after that. The end.
No, I feel like I can ask questions about this one.
Fair.
What would you say was... You said this was the thing that got you into active role-playing.
Yeah.
What moment did it stop being a thing that we're trying out and become a thing that I am doing now? A thing that is a thing I do? If you can remember, what do you think was there a watershed moment that you had that made that change, or was it gradual?
I would say that there were more like several different watermarks. Thing one was making friends because they heard us using role-playing lingo. That was kind of cool. I've been a loader most of my life. I got a couple of friends in high school, and that's who I played with. But then more people became attracted to our presence because of using role-playing words. But what really cemented me as like a lifer, that didn't happen until we were playing, 2nd and 3rd edition, and we spent summers just fucking running dungeons, man, and exploring the world. That was it. That was the turning point. That was the fucking Rubicon. Had very little to do with Vampire the Masquerade.
Still, it's an interesting story.
Yeah.
My next two are two that are kind of two sides of the same coin in one very specific aspect, so I'm probably just going to do them back to back. Oh, actually, you know what? I skipped one. We'll do that one first.
Okay.
This one is one that probably is the book that affected my life least that's still on this list, because it taught me a very important lesson. A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin.
That lesson was, don't do what Donnie Don't does. Donnie Don't being Ned Stark.
No. And it's not the lesson you would expect, sometimes the good guys lose, what have you. No, I already gathered that. It was perseverance. It was the ability to get through a hard portion of something, to enjoy the fruits of one's labor in terms of reading. I've always been proud of the fact that I don't think there's any book I've never finished once I started it. But there are several book series that I did not get past the first book for, because they sucked.
Notably, Even's Twilight, you read up to 2?
Hey, no, my ex-girlfriend made me read those. I did not
have
a choice.
No, yeah, I understand that, but you called quitsies after 2 or 3?
I think it was 3, honestly.
3? Yeah.
They're not complex books. They were an afternoon's work.
And why read those when you could spend an afternoon reading My Teacher Glows in the Dark?
Seriously, why read those when you could spend an afternoon staring at a blank wall?
I do love blank walls.
Anyway. The first book in this series isn't very good. It's just not. It's all the wrong kinds of world building and pacing. And I'm a guy who loves world building, loves interesting settings, and all that. This is all the wrong bits of it. It's, look at this interesting setting, now enjoy all the parts that no one gives a fuck about. And let me write about 19 chapters on food. You can tell he's a fat person, okay? There's a lot of fucking food in that book series.
I guess you probably couldn't tell I'm fat from my books, huh?
No.
Just, I don't really talk about food much. And then Colt found a juicy fucking steak, dripping with wetness. He placed a morsel onto his tongue, and it savored the viscosity of the meat intermingled with steak sauce, only of the highest A1 caliber.
Now, take that, do it 4,000 more times, and include the word neeps.
Fucking neeps!
And you have made a George R. Martin chapter in that first book. And so I put the series down. I had heard people go on about how good it was, so I picked up the first book, and oh no, they were wrong. They were wrong. Wrong. And then I put it down for like a year. And it just, like, everyone kept going on and on about how good these books were and how amazing it was. And they talked about all this cool shit that happens later. And eventually I had to head back into the abyss. I picked up the second book in the series, and I have never looked back. It is very well made. It is, like, after he got that big, hard, painful turd out of the way, he was free to show you all the bountiful nirvana that lay beyond. That's right, I'm saying George R. R. Martin's asshole is a portal to enlightenment.
I think he'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
He's got exactly the right ego.
And it's a very well-made story. It has an incredible world building, so it was really a good experience that I had to get through a pretty shitty experience to enjoy.
I would say the thing that taught me that was Taxi Driver.
Yeah, that's a good way of...
Not that movie is shitty up until the end.
No, it's boring.
But yeah, it's a lot of boring and, why the fuck am I watching this? Why is this so great? And then the last 20 minutes you're like, oh.
Oh, I see, that's why.
I understand all of the things, and then some things I didn't know I was supposed to understand.
Okay.
Okay, what would you say? Because you told me a little bit about this when you were reading it. You were like, this happens, and it's the dumbest shit.
Yeah.
What would you say was, like, I mean, because you finished the book.
Mm-hmm.
What was the lowest point where you were like, I don't know if I can do this?
The lowest point.
Because that kind of thing sticks with you.
Yeah. It was one of the chapters from Daenerys' point of view.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it was the last chapter from Daenerys' point of view, because that's where she, like, sets a bitch on fire and does some cool shit and starts being the Khaleesi, who she will become later. Like, the one before it is just so goddamned whiny. Oh, alright. People who've never read these books and have only experienced the wonderful Emilia Clarke and her performance.
Hello.
She does a lot to make you like Daenerys Stormborn that fucking George R. R. Martin doesn't do. Because he portrays her accurately. And she is a pretty fucking sheltered little girl. And acts it. Her chapters in the first book are the most self-centered, whiny, awful bullshit. They are honestly a struggle to get through. And the lowest point was, I think, the chapter where she saves Miri Mazda. A decision which comes back to bite her royally in the ass, I might add. That fucking chapter. If that's not the same chapter as the end of Miri Mazda, and if it is, then that got way better. But what I remember of that little bit before we went back to someone else, holy shit, was that annoying and bad.
Good to know.
Oh.
Next up on my list, going from one thing of vampires into another. I'm sorry, our cat's exploded. That would be the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series up to a certain extent. By Laurel K. Hamilton. a friend of mine introduced me to these books. He was like, they're good. And so I was like, all right, I'll read them. And, they were really up my alley. They followed that philosophy of, give the people what they're here for and get them out the door.
Yes, they do.
Even in the early books, it was like, you're here for a cool mystery, cool vampires, cool zombies, cool characters. Here, have it all. Eat it in your face. Now go. And I liked that. It was, really exciting. And, there was romance and there were, mysteries, like I said. Cool supernatural elements. Great ideas. And I loved the series. Up until...
Narcissus and Jinx.
That was the last one. That was my backbreaker. I read them again, and I got through Cerulean Sins. God, I might have even gotten into the next one. But it was effort.
Having gone past where he did Obsidian Butterfly, you can stop. If you want to read this series, read to Obsidian Butterfly. It is one of the best books in the series, and it's all downhill from there.
Removing in its entirety, if I can, the author's stance on the why. Because I do not choose to argue that this day, or perhaps even ever. She's fully welcome to write what she wants to write. However, I came into this book series wanting to read about cool adventures and some romance in a cool supernatural world.
A very cool supernatural world, to be fair.
And to be absolutely fair, she gave me that for 10, 12 books. And then it became BDSM sexy times with vampires.
It became, better written 50 Shades of Grey. Before 50 Shades of Grey.
And better researched, I think, as well.
Much better research.
Yeah,
Before 50 Shades of Grey was 50 Shades of Grey.
All of you listeners who like 50 Shades of Grey and thinks that's what S&M is, educate yourself. Read a Wikipedia article first, and then open your lives to this. It's like 50 Shades of Grey meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
And if that's what works for you, then
that
read to Obsidian Butterfly, and then head forward, young adventurer. You have reached the promised land.
Well, and it's littered throughout for the rest of it. But, what's a sex scene or two? That doesn't bother me.
It becomes the main attraction
it becomes,
after that point.
Yeah. And that's just not what I'm interested in reading. I wanted cool mysteries. That's it. But more importantly, these books were the thing that made me go, I can do better than this. And I do not mean that as a slam to Laurel K. Hamilton. She is 10,000 years more successful than I am, and that has to speak for something. But I see her writing, and some of the things she oddly leans on, like reused, overused phrasing. Ass Deep in Alligators, for example. I haven't read one of those books in years, and that's still in my head. That just weren't, I don't know, as good as I felt I could put out. That was the challenge I set to myself, and 4 books later, here we are. Again, no disrespect to the woman. I mean...
Look, end of the day, you're free to write whatever you want to write. The story you wrote changed, and the story you're writing now is not something that interests either himself or me.
I still have a lot of love for it. I still have a lot of love for the characters, Jean-Claude, Asher. Not Richard ever, but...
It's because he's always been a douche.
Pretty much. And Anita herself, Hell, most of the characters in those books, but it's just gone past what I enjoy, and I'm glad that it spurred me on to make my own stuff, because now I have my own little thriving world that I've created that I can play around in, and it's the accomplishment of my lifetime, really.
Well, I feel like I got a lot to live up to there.
Yeah.
I'll do the ones that I was going to do back to back. Okay. So, as far as I'm concerned, this book wasn't about... This list wasn't about your favorite book, but your favorite book should probably be on it. At the same point, you should probably have something from your favorite author. I have both, but they're not the same. And they're the ones I want to do back to back. We'll start with number 8 here. The Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Stephen King's my favorite author. Stephen King has the exact right mix of well-made prose, interesting characters, realistic psychology, and batshit crazy bullshit that makes me your fan. And the Dark Tower series is his crowning achievement, honestly. I think he's pretty much in agreement about that. It is his, Lord of the Rings. That's what it is. That's what he set out to make it. It's 7 books, and it is amazing. I have no other way of describing it that's accurate. How it affected my life was in the things it taught me. It taught me that there's a line between going after what you want and being a fucking crazy person.
Like obsessing over it.
Yeah. And that's a line that Roland of Gilead crosses a lot. Back and forth, really. It also taught me a really important lesson that I'd like to get off on a little tangent about. There's a concept. Essentially the concept of family, but not family you're born into, the family you choose. The people you surround yourself with who make up the bulk of your life, who aren't necessarily related to you by blood, but who are your family. There's a term that I have in my head for this that isn't accurate, as I understand it. It's not an accurate translation of the Japanese, but it's stuck in my head through a long series of events, and I'm still using it because it fits. Nakama. It is your family. Whether or not they be related by blood is immaterial. This book series didn't teach me the importance of that. That was taught to me later. This book series came into my life in a period where I didn't have a whole lot of friends. So it taught me that this was an option. And that, as one can expect, became very important later. The next book on the series, the next book in my list is...
Well, before you go on.
Okay.
I've never read The Dark Tower because I only found out about it after I developed problems reading. But I have experienced it secondhand through a weird filter. And it's a very interesting story. One that if I somehow ever manage to overcome my issues, would love to sit down and read. Please carry on.
The next one's my favorite book. Colt Reed, Fortunate Son, by Eric J. Chucci. And the smug look on his face, by the way.
I'm trying not to make... But I was actually thinking, what good joke could we shoot out here? Sounds like a handsome name, was what I was about to say. No, please, it's actually really weird and like a little unnerving that you are that fond of something I pooped out.
Yeah,
but also a deep honor as well. So I try not to be big-headed about it.
This is not a joke, it is my favorite book. It taught me something about, as I put the list here, the first kind of family. How important it is to remember your blood relations, to remember your roots, because those aren't people you can't get back. And you should probably try and maintain connection with them. That's something that comes through really strongly. It's one of the major themes of the book. The idea of what it is to lose your roots, and how important those can be. And what is home, exactly. And the other thing it does is it just tells a really good story. And I love it also for some personal reasons. Some of the characters resonate with me for hilarious reasons, and some for in-jokey reasons. And maybe it's partially my favorite book because of how deeply connected I am with the lore and the world in which it's created. That has, possibly everything to do with it. But a big part of it is also Colt. And the things that happen to him in that story. The emotional changes he goes through. They are such a really good bit of character development that it makes that book as good as it is. And it is probably the book in your writing that allows itself the time to unspool a narrative thread the most.
Yeah, I think it's one of the few times I've surprised you with a twist at the end.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah, you fucking got me with that one hard.
And if I may,
oh yeah, it's very rare that you have the author on hand of your favorite book.
Well, I want to keep it brief
not for me,
because I don't want to, go into super spoiler town. But the cult books so far are about a regular guy who's maybe not the best person, but he has good intentions, growing and becoming a better person. And as you kind of mentioned, it's not the biggest turning point in his mentality so far, but it's where you kind of see the results of a big turning point he had in the previous book. And I think that's vague enough while still getting the point across well enough that hopefully the listener can understand what I'm talking about. And I would agree, that's very important. And, I hate that I've done this, because I am the person who feels that, the first season of your TV show should be good so that I want to watch the next season. In hindsight, my first book is okay. It's pretty good. But it's not the best.
Gets you into the world.
Yeah, it gets you into the world. It's an introduction, but it's not...
No, your third book is your best.
It is narratively inferior to the second, third, and fourth.
Yes, that's true.
And... which are three wildly different stories.
Also very true.
And I kind of feel bad that people have to get through that to get to the good stuff, because I'm always worried they're going to be like,
See, I've read Game of Thrones, though.
Yeah, that's true.
I've read, that's A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not as bad as that.
Well, no. I have a detachment from it because I've read it 1,000,000 times. But, because that's what one has to do when one is writing and editing. But, it's still a good story. Usually when I pick it up, I'm like, yeah, this is fun. Not as much as the other three. But we're talking about years of experience separating those.
And the experience of writing a novel, separating the first from the second.
Yeah. But I would agree with the things you've said, and I'm not one who informs your opinion a lot. I don't... In fact, I staunchly avoid that.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to my own work. So, I've also read the book, and I recommend it. In fact, if you were so inclined, there happens to be a link in the description of the video. You shouldn't even have to fucking click anything to see it. I'm pretty sure it's on the top. Just click that, and you can order the books from Amazon.com, other popular retailers, and if you want them signed, drop me a line on YouTube or on social media. My Twitter is in the description as well. I will order the books for you, send them to you, eat some of the cost of that, because I'm nice like that. Unless you're overseas, then
we'll have to talk.
That's really expensive, we'll have to talk. But I will still sign them and personalize them for you if you are so inclined.
And this is entirely unrelated to whether or not it benefits me. I would very much recommend you pick up this book. Don't get me wrong, the first two are also really good. The third one is actually pretty fucking
You kind of need the first two to really... I mean, I'm not one of those writers that drops you in the middle again. You get your refresher, but you're not going to appreciate it as much if you haven't read the first two.
It's the character development isn't going to shine through as well. But let's go back to you, because I did 2 in a row.
Yeah, you did 2 in a row. That fucks up everything.
Yep, they just go together.
Yeah, I guess. I don't have that, so I will pick 2 others here. Let's go with Giants, Monsters, and Dragons, an Encyclopedia of Folklore, Legend, and Myth by Carol Rose. This is what amounts to a monstrology textbook.
Yeah, I've read it. I've actually read this one.
It's not even quite what I wanted out of it once I understood what it was. I asked my father and stepmother for a monster manual. This is what I got. I meant a D&D monster manual, and I was a teeny bit salty at first, but it is a weighty tome. And, I don't know, I like encyclopedia, so I decided I'd leaf through it. And it's actually got a lot of interesting shit in there. Not about the monsters I was hoping for, a lot more giants than I thought, but it still has a lot of interesting shit. And I think I talked about some of it last week when I was mentioning the cactus cats and yeah, some of the lumberjack lore. And it's got stuff from all over the place. Australian stuff, stuff from Japan and China and Europe. Just a very interesting book.
I'm glad there's a lot of giants, because giants is the first thing on the title.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I'm glad there's a lot of giants because there's giants. Like, I'm glad giants is the first thing in the title because there's lots of giants, I should say. Like, if they led off with dragons, I would have been kind of miffed. Like, this is mostly about giants, you fucking liars.
But no, they did not fucking... they didn't bury the lead.
But a lot of the stuff in it inspired a lot of the stuff that became the fluff of Colt. I don't know. It was just... I mean, it was influential. I read it a lot for it being a monstrology encyclopedia. There's sadly not much to say about it. There's nothing there narratively. It is literally a list of entries about different monsters from different cultures. But there you go. Next up is an actual fucking book. If you are not already aware, since the boy mentioned it, and I said so right here, if you don't have a book by your favorite author in the list, you're probably in need of a new favorite author. And my favorite author is Franz Kafka. He has been dead for many years now due to the dreaded potato disease. But his work, even through the bass-ackwards way I got into it, is some of the most poignant and interesting shit I have ever had the pleasure of putting before mine eyes. I actually struggled with what book to choose as the most influential, because my favorite story of his is in a penal colony, which is a short story, but it's fucking fantastic. If you want an actual recommendation, hey, if I read anything that you've ever read that isn't the Colt Regan series, you unforgivable shill, what should I read? The short story In a Penal Colony, Franz Kafka. You can finish it in a couple hours.
Which I've never read, by the way.
Well, you're a contrarian. So,
do we have it?
Yeah.
I might read that.
I think it's on the shelf. Anyway, if not, I'm sure you can find it online. For real, not, illegally. But there's also The Metamorphosis, which is undeniably a classic.
And his most famous work.
Yes, definitely. And I love it as well. But in terms of influence, I have to pick America, which is with a K. I say that if you go searching for it yourself.
You realize someone's going to type in Camerica.
Camerica!
Don't spell it. Move on.
No, I wasn't. I was trying to think of a good joke where, Goku was firing a Camerica, but it died on the vine. It's not done. There is no ending. It's because he died. You get pretty much the whole of the story. There's a huge gap of time where he picks up sometime after the middle, and then a bit toward the end, a chapter toward the end. And you keep talking about books that taught you things. And I haven't really mentioned any of that. I have books that shaped me, books that pushed me in a certain direction, or books that opened my eyes to a whole new world, but this is really one of the only books that taught me something. First and foremost, it taught me that you don't always get everything. In that it is not done. And it never will be.
You don't get it.
Even if some jackass, or even if Max Brod back in the day had finished it, it's not Kafka. It's not the same. It also taught me to...
Side note, fan fiction taught me that lesson.
I didn't get into fan fiction until later in life, and it's still kind of difficult for me, but I digress. It also taught me that sometimes the ideas and visions of others are far more possible than one would initially want to give them. Ability to be. I had to finish that sentence before I could finish getting it out. Kafka had never been to America. He'd read about America in pamphlets and such. To the point that when he described the Statue of Liberty, she was holding a sword. This was not some sort of, condemnation of America as a war country or anything like that. Nope, he just thought that's what she had. But there was shit he would describe in his books that, later got developed. This wondrous world that he painted, that a lot of which became a reality. Not because of him. He's not terribly influential in the mainstream scope, but he's a big pillar of writing. If you go into a Starbucks or go into a Barnes & Noble, he's above the Starbucks on the mural that they paste on there. But it's not something your average person, even at the height of their individual industries, is going to be picking up.
No.
So
it's not even anything that I think mainstream, people who are not very much into literature even know.
Right.
They might know about the Metamorphosis.
Probably. It's become mimetic enough that I feel that people know of it, while not necessarily having read it. It also just sort of... There's a feeling to it. That it's sort of delivered between the main character, his interaction with the world, and the way the world treats him, that I had a strong identification with as a teenager when I read it. I don't want to say that it helped me through shit, because it didn't, but it gave me a good backbone, a good solid, foundation to stand on when it comes to dealing with people, especially shitty people. Picking myself up and going forward, even though that's hard and there's no hope in sight. Because sometimes it gets less shitty, at the very least.
I like that. That's a far more positive message than I think Kafka would have ever intended.
He's a brilliant writer, and so overexcitable.
And very depressing.
Yes. Yes.
Alright, I think that brings us to my last one.
And mine as well.
Alright. So, my last one is actually kind of similar to one you mentioned earlier, but it's for such very different reasons that I waited. The last one on my list, and the one that up until you mentioned, that most of this list is books that taught me things. Because, while my parents tried their hardest, I'm sure, I got more of who I am as a person from what I absorbed, television, movies, books, than people I interacted with. I was very internal as a kid. If I would internalize a lesson myself from a thing I picked up and I chose before I could get it from someone who's trying to teach it to me. So a lot of books that influence me are books that influence me by teaching me a thing, by teaching me something about myself or something about the world. This last one, I decided to go very, very literal. Dungeons and Dragons. I'm including all editions in this, all the editions, because as I put on this list from the Facebook post, Edition Wars isn't what this is about. The reason it's on here is twofold. One, it was one of the first creative things I did. I wrote stories when I was very little, 5 or 6. My mom had a typewriter, I would write her little stories. She probably still has them all, because that's the kind of person my mom is.
An awesome person.
Yeah. But that's not really, that was far and away in the sands of time. D&D was probably one of the first things I did that was creative, that was making stories. And that's important. That's not why it's on this list. Why it's on this list is because I could very easily credit Dungeons and Dragons for everything I have in my life. My house, my car, the laptop I'm talking at right now, this podcast. I can very easily credit Dungeons and Dragons for that. Dungeons and Dragons is what made me Eric J. Chucci as a friend. It's what led to us knowing each other well enough that he offered me a place to live after I graduated high school. It's what got me my first job. It is what got me the life I have today. So I think if I had to put these in order, what book influenced my life the most, Dungeons and Dragons would probably win.
You know, it's ironic that you should say that. Because I kind of did the same thing. Accidentally. You know, looking at my list here, this sounds so fake and forced, but I swear to God, I'm just thinking of this right now. Out of all of the books I read, this is probably the one I read the earliest. Gosh, is it even? Yeah. Well, other than Nintendo Player's Guide. And probably some Choose Your Own Adventure books. But the one that is a solid book. This is the one I read the earliest. And when I first created this list, I was kind of like, should I put it on here? Because there were a handful of ones that we'll rattle off as honorable mentions in a second. That I was like, oh, that's really good. I like that series. But this one just kept sort of sitting in my brain. And much like the boy did earlier, I know we said we weren't going to do a dramatic reading, but I phrased things really well here, so why bother fucking with what I've already accomplished?
I feel like by not doing a dramatic reading, I've probably made your experience worse, listener, because I took time to fucking phrase this shit on this Facebook.
Yeah, same here. And we've also eaten half an hour of your time more than was necessary. The book in question is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I haven't read the rest of the books in the series. I didn't know there were more books in the series until recently. But what it taught me, or conveyed to me perhaps, it ran away with my imagination. It was a series of batshit events that probably shouldn't have been connected, but they were. And that was okay. It still presented itself as a whole tale. It gave me a small glimpse as a child into dystopian horror. It taught me that not all monsters are scary and bad, and that evil often smiles and wears a suit. That romance can be small and quiet, but still meaningful and profound. To never overlook potential in something that just doesn't look like it has potential. I cite my teacher glows in the dark as sort of an entry into xenophilia in general. Maybe this is more accurate. Maybe this broke down barriers that I didn't know I still had into accepting that which is easy to mock. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just talking on my ass. I don't know.
Well, that's...
I get purple as fuck sometimes. So.
That you do. So, we've gone terribly over, listener. But I kind of expected that because we're both either former or current voracious readers. And we get wordy when we talk about words.
Yeah. I have... If I had a better attention span, I'd still be reading. The last thing I read in earnest with that veracity was Harry Potter. And if you don't mind, I would like to rattle off, really literally just rattle off.
I don't really have any honorable mentions, so you go ahead.
I do. We mentioned Goosebumps, and I did like them a lot as a kid. The Boxcar Children books were really important to me for a lot of reasons. I can't really go into them because I don't have them written down already, but they were nice. They were good books. They were mysteries, hey. Where the Red Fern Grows was an incredibly important book and beautiful. The Indian in the Cupboard series, I loved to death. Just, it gave my imagination so much room to take flight. Harry Potter, as I mentioned, and The Crucible, which is an awful, awful book to read, but a wonderful story. Once again, a cat has exploded.
That happens around here. Well, next week, at the very least, listener, there will be wrestling.
Shit. Are you excited? Someone should be.
I am, I think.
I'm looking forward to the spectacle.
But before we get to next week, I think this is probably one of the more positive podcasts we've done that wasn't just us gushing about something we like.
Well,
Because it was just us gushing about something we like, but I love reading, and I don't mean like I love to do it as a pastime. I love that it exists. So I'm glad that we both were able to come up with 10 things which affected us in one way or another in very important ways.
Yeah.
That reading touched both our lives that important. That much. But did you have any segue? Because I don't.
I had something, but it was really like trite and I would even go so far as to say tripe.
Yeah.
You know what? Fuck it. Okay, let's go. Let's do it. We got it. Okay, hold on. It's bad. Brace yourselves, listener. I wouldn't be mad if you clicked away from the video right now. I guess it just goes to show that sometimes things are good, even though nerds aren't talking about it.
But everything's better when nerds talk about it.
Ooh, I didn't think of that.
Fuck it, let's go home!